It was in the middle of the day, so the smoke just darkened everything. Well, that was only one of the problems. The smoke came into the log cabins. It came, if you didn't have a fire in the chimney, it seeped down the chimney. It went up under in the rafters and came in. It came through cracks, came in around the windows, came in around the doors. So there was as much smoke in as out. There was no escape. People wet handkerchiefs and put it up over their noses to try and breathe through the wet handkerchief to filter out the smoke, the ash that was in the air. Cattle got sick, and it was recorded that men went out of the door of their log cabins to take care of their animals as best they could, would open the door, step out, and run into a deer that was standing there sick and disoriented. And so the wild animals were even sick. And of course, a lot of cattle were very sick. A man named George Wanacott, who lived in Emerson Township, which is directly south of us. Of course, we're in St. Louis, but this used to be Bethany, and Emerson's the next one south. He had apparently business to conduct in Ithaca, and he walked to Ithaca in the middle of this smoke. He suffered all the way. It took him about twice as long. He left at 8 in the morning, didn't get there till 4 in the afternoon. And he must have conducted his business, stayed all night, and headed back home on probably established trails, which would only be safe because you wander off in the woods a little ways and where are you? You could easily be lost. As he approached the William Emerson cabin, he saw a bear. And of course, men carried guns with them, and so he shot the bear and dressed it out and gave the meat to the Emersons, who were probably very happy to have it. And then he kept the lard, took it home, rendered it into bear oil. Then he went to the neighbor, Emery Allen. The Allens have been in Emerson Township forever, and they went out to their cows or oxen, and they dosed each animal, got it under the throat, pulled it up, got its mouth open, and poured some bear oil down into its raw throat. Wanacott said he could hear animals, cows, wheezing for 40 rods. They were so sick, and I mean that's over 600 feet, so that's quite a distance. Well, those examples show how serious it was during that, what became known as the Smoky October. Very tough on people, domestic animals, and wild animals. After 2 weeks, rains came, settled the clouds of smoke, and in some areas, big portions of the woods had burned, including they burned some very fine stands of oaks, probably some elm, maple. The damage to in these areas was very great, and then as these trees had fallen over and had become worthless, they were replaced just automatically by willows and cottonwoods, which are regarded as inferior trees of any value to people. Some of the trees fell over into streams and dammed them up, and so there were new ponds in the woods. Ash washed off by the rains into, for instance, the Pine River. Wood ash and water makes lye, and so a bunch of fish died. And the Indians came and gathered up these dead fish and tried to sell them to the white man, who was wise enough to know that these fish were probably already half spoiled. So the smoky time, the smoky October, was finally over. But they were facing the winter of 1856 and 57. By this time, Saginaw and Bay City lumbermen had come into parts of the county, out in Seville and Sumner and over into Montcalm. They had the wherewithal to bring loads of supplies. They even had to supply hay for their horses, and horses being a part of lumber camp. So they brought all this in, probably mainly from Saginaw. And so some of the people who had no food, no money, some of the men went and became lumberjacks for the winter. So it did produce some money, and they could go to some of the small stores and maybe get enough to tide them over. People were finally down, many of the families are down to just scrounging to get anything to eat. Well, the woods seemed to have a lot of leaks in them, Those are wild onions. And they dug a lot of wild onions, and they fed them to the cows, and they fed them to the people. And when they milked the cow's milk tasted of onions, but it didn't matter because that's what the people were eating too. So they didn't even notice it. People who had grain of any kind would send it usually by one person down to Matherton, which was generally 30 to 40 miles away, and there they would, that was the mill, the closest mill, and so one guy made the trip because they didn't want to risk more oxen because so many had already died. And so the people would just throw their bag of corn or bag of wheat or whatever they had into the wagon. Later in the winter, they made sleds, which were pulled by people, not by oxen, and they took them down to Matherton to have their grain ground into flour or cornmeal. People were innovative. What if you have some corn? What if you had a little harvest of corn, but you can't take it to a mill? Well, some people had a coffee mill, a coffee grinder. There could be one here in the museum, I don't know. A box about so big, it had a drawer underneath, it had a crank on the top. You put in your coffee beans, ground it, and when you pulled out the drawer, there you had fresh coffee. They used it to grind kernels of corn so that they could have cornmeal. And everybody took their turn, and it took a lot of cranking to get enough cornmeal so that you could have mush or Johnny cake or whatever they were going to make. The other thing they did, some took a tin pan, they turned it upside down over the end of the log, they took a nail and a hammer and they beat holes in it. Then when they turned it over, those tin holes stuck up and they had a grater. So they took their corn and rubbed it across this tin pan. One man took a log and he hollowed it out by burning and carving until he had what we might call a very large mortar. And then he took a 4-foot limb and fastened a rock in the end of it, and he had a pestle. And you poured the corn in, and then you kept beating the corn until it reached the consistency that you wanted. Scrape it all out into a pan, put some more in, and just keep at it until you had enough. Everybody had to do it. Even if the kids were big enough, they had to participate as well. After all, this is the only food that you have. Men from Clinton County came up into Gratiot County with food. They'd gone and gotten supplies, and now they were going to sell them one way or another to the settlers in Gratiot County. But those people really didn't have anything. I mean, they really didn't. A good many of them had no money. They had nothing to barter. And so even the storekeeper at Maple Rapids, as long as people had anything to trade, why, they were wonderful people. The minute they came wanting to sign an IOU, they were among the laziest bunch of no-goods he had ever laid eyes on. And so he cheated them $10 for a barrel of flour. People, that would be hundreds of dollars today. And then the men that came up, other men that came up bringing food, you know, would charge so much for everything in taking trade. People shot deer. If there were hunters, they went out and shot deer. In the winter of 1856-57, 300 bears were killed in Gratiot County. And Reverend H.T. Barnaby, who was not only a minister but also a farmer and obviously a hunter, went out, and that winter he shot 45 deer, 1 bear, and 1 wolf. And that was regarded as a record for one man. They looked forward to the spring of 1857. Everybody had stayed alive, sometimes barely. They were looking forward to sugaring. Did you know that maple sugar was the standard sweetener in the state of Michigan at that time? Cane sugar would have had to be imported. It would have been expensive. Nobody even expected to get that. Beet sugar was unknown. And so it was important that you have a good sugaring season. Did they have buckets to do all that? Yes. They had wooden buckets. Those are very important because, after all, you're getting not only the sugar for yourself for cooking, but you're also getting probably extra that you can use for trading.